All right. So thank you everyone for coming to my talk today. Thank you to the organizers of SEALS 33 for allowing me to present off-site. And I'll go ahead and get started with my presentation, Indices as Syntactic Objects, a case study from Hakha Lai. So there are two main goals of the talk. The first is to describe and analyze two types of definite expressions found in Hakha Lai, which is a South Central Tibeto-Burman language. And specifically, I'm going to focus on the morpheme ma and its role in defining these two definite expression categories. Looking at the examples in 1 and 2, we can see that both of these sentences could be translated as something like the dog is big, but there are slight differences. Most notably, in 2, we see the presence of this prenominal morpheme ma. Um, and this gives the interpretation of the dog or that dog, which we are currently talking about or which has been mentioned, is big. Interestingly, also, ma always occurs in demonstrative expressions in Hakha Lai. So we can see this in 3 and 4, where we have this book, where we have a sequence of the ma prenominal morpheme book and a postnominal discourse deictic, which encodes the spatial deictic information. I'll uh, elaborate on that further in a moment. In 4, we see another example of such a demonstrative where we have prenominal ma, the nominal book, and then a postnominal discourse deictic, which again encodes the spatial deictic information. Another place where we see this ma morpheme is in personal pronouns, where ma appears to be a suffix. So in the example in 5, we have third person singular personal pronoun he is ama. So we have a series of examples where this morpheme ma appears in what are generally considered definite expressions, but not all definite expressions contain ma. So my second goal of the talk today is to propose a novel analysis of the syntactic and semantic nature of Hakha Lai definite expressions uh, and ground it into the recent work that's been done on the syntactic status of indices on indefinite expressions. A whole series of citations here, but there are actually several others. And the main upshot of this is that there are two categories to consider for definite expressions: plain or unique definite expressions, which appear in Hakha Lai, do not contain an index, which I'll explain further in a moment, and indexed or anaphoric definites, which do contain an index, and that this index is represented by this morpheme we've been observing, ma. So the structure of the talk going forward will be, first, I'll give some background on these two categories and some of the theoretical underpinnings of how these two categories were conceived of. Then I'll look at the data that I've gathered in Hakha Lai in collaboration with 4 fluent speakers, specifically looking at bare definite expressions, demonstratives, and personal pronouns. And then I'll finish up my talk by proposing potential semantic and syntactic structures of these two categories, the unique and indexed definites, where unique definites lack an index and are just composed of determiner head and their NP complement, and index definites contain additional extended articulation, namely the index, which I'm calling dem. And likewise, personal pronouns consist solely of this index-bearing head, dem. So let's get into the background for this research. So recent work has identified or investigated these two properties of definite expressions. Presupposition of uniqueness is the first one, and in the traditional sense, this was considered one of the identifying factors of a definite expression. Um, Another theoretical track was that, in fact, definite expressions contain anaphoric reference to a previous discourse element. That is, only when there's a unique referent can a definite article like English the be used, um, or only when the referent has been mentioned previously in discourse. That is when definite articles such as the can be used. And in fact, what the recent research has found is that it's better to analyze these two theoretical tracks as subcategories of definites. These two categories being unique or plain definites and anaphoric or index definites. Unique definites contain, again, merely the definite determiner and merely presuppose uniqueness. We see an example of this in 6, where there's a single computer in a room visible to the speaker and addressee, and the speaker is able to say the computer is turned off. The computer, this definite expression, can be felicitously used because there's a single unique computer in the room. The anaphoric definite, on the other hand, contains both a definite determiner and an index. So in a context like 7, the speaker bought a computer and a phone, and they say, yesterday I got a new computer and a new phone. The phone didn't cost too much, but the computer was pretty expensive. The computer refers back to the introduced referent, a new computer previously. And I use the subscript C here to show that these are co-indexed, meaning that they're referring to the same discourse entity. And it is because computer was previously mentioned in the discourse that the expression the computer can be felicitously used. Now, what complicates this is that in English, both of these definite expressions are the computer. So we have a unique definite, the computer, and an anaphoric definite, also the computer. However, the research that is cited above finds that this does not hold cross-linguistically, and in some cases, languages have distinct morphological patterns to encode these two subcategories of definites. Moving on to more details of unique definites. Again, they're mainly characterized by the presupposition of uniqueness. That is, their referent in the expression is unique in the context. I have here 2 lexical entries that represent how this is represented, how this is shown semantically. These effectively say the same thing, that you have a referent with a property, and it is the sole reference in the context with that property. Looking at some examples below, we have like immediate situation definites, like the baby is asleep, where there's one baby. The sun, which is a larger situation or global unique definite, there's one sun that's referred to. Or a bridging example, where you say, my car isn't running well, the engine needs to be serviced. It's understood that the engine exists in the context because if you have a car, you have an engine. Another vital characteristic of unique definites that distinguish them from anaphoric definites is that they allow for covariant readings, meaning that even though it's a definite expression, it can actually refer to different reference in different situations. Like every year, the president pardons a turkey, where it can be a different president every year. At every church, the pastor's a good speaker, where the pastor can be a different pastor at each church, or it could be the same. I include here 2 examples from other languages, just to show that unique definites can be represented different ways. So we see in marka defning, where there is an overt definite article that occurs with an expression like the sun, whereas in Mandarin Chinese, there is no overt definite article, thus illustrating that different languages approach even the category of unique definites in different ways. You can have bare nominals, or you can have an overt definite article like English the. Turning to anaphoric definites, not only do they have the uniqueness property, but they also have an index. And traditionally, we've seen indices as the subscripts on nominals that share a reference. But what this recent research has argued is that these indices are actually syntactically present. So we can try to breeze through this, but uh, here are two lexical entries for anaphoric definites, and how this differs from unique definites is that there's this additional component that identifies the referent with the variable that is equal to a previously mentioned discourse referent. So we can see some examples of these from English. Say someone's holding a burrito, they refer to the burrito, this burrito is delicious. A sentence like, I saw Jeff at school yesterday, he was eating grapes again, where he is a personal pronoun referring back to Jeff, who was previously introduced in the discourse. Or a sentence like, a cat and a dog were chasing each other in the bookstore. I don't know how the dog got in there. Again, covariation is an identifying feature of these two categories. Anaphoric definites disallow covariant readings. So we have a sentence like, every year that president pardons a turkey. This cannot be felicitously used to refer to different presidents in different years. And again, two examples from Marca Dafing and Mandarin Chinese. We see in Marca Dafing where there's an additional component in an anaphoric definite, this prefixal element. And then in Mandarin Chinese, an overt demonstrative expression is used for an indexed anaphoric definite. Okay, now briefly going over the syntactic structures of these two categories. The unique definites, quite simple. In these analyses, it is simply a determiner, head, often that contains iota, which includes the uniqueness, and it takes an NP complement. Does not contain an index. Where we see more interesting structure is with the anaphoric definites. So if we have an example sentence like, in 2024, that president said he would run again. I've identified I'm sharing two examples of analyses of anaphoric definites. First from Jenks and Konate here, where the index is in spec DP or spec indexed DP position. And compare this with the Haining analysis, where the index is between the DP and NP. So just placing the index being syntactically present, but placing them in two different locations in the syntactic structure. Okay, in the interest of time, let's go on to the Hakha Lai data. That's interesting here. So Hakha Lai is a Tibeto-Burman language spoken in Chin State, Myanmar. It's also spoken in diaspora communities around the world, most notably in Indianapolis, Indiana, because that's where I did my research. And there's a large community of Chin language speakers there. And Hakha Lai is one of many Chin languages. It's SOV and head final, has internally and externally headed relatives, and it's likely an articleless language, though that's something I'm still investigating. The data that I present here come from 4 speakers in their early 20s. They're from Hakka, Vongtu, Tanplang, and Sunpla, and I cite that in each piece of data. And I gathered the data that I'm presenting here today I gathered that based on Tonhauser and Matthewson's methodology, which I can talk more about later. Let's go to definite expressions in Hakha Lai. So there are 3 categories that I'd like to look at because of the ways that definites are encoded in Hakha Lai. These are bare nouns, nouns with postnominal discourse deictics, and nouns with prenominal ma. This includes demonstrative and personal pronouns. So firstly, regarding bare noun definites, they can realize unique definites. Unique definite reading. So we see in 24 and 25, 25 being a clear example where there's one baby, it's sleeping, and referring to the baby, we have simply now, which means baby, a bear noun, definite. I did find at least one example where a bear noun can be used to refer to an anaphoric definite, though it's not clear if this is actually a reference to kind, because we have a sentence, are there any apples left? And the addressee responds, no, the apples have all been eaten. This could be referring back to the apples previously mentioned in the discourse, or it could be reference to kinds of apples generally. Discourse deictics, the post-nominal elements seen in demonstratives, also are present when realizing unique definites. So we have an example in 28 where someone was driving behind a school bus full of children. They're telling their friend about it later. The friend asks what happened next, and the speaker says, the boys went to the zoo and the girls went to the school, where the boys, an immediate situation definite, followed by post-nominal discourse deictic ka, and same with the girls. Can also have kind reference, like lychee is a fruit. This is also followed by discourse deictic, in this case, zu. You can get indefinite readings with discourse deictics additionally. And as I alluded to earlier, discourse deictic ka can be used to mark speaker addressee familiarity. And this could be interpreted as a definite article, potentially. Now, moving on to ma, which is an important point for today. So, ma appears in demonstratives. We have an example here, this tooth, where ma, ha, he. Ma is the demonstrative element, ha is tooth, and then the post-nominal discourse deictic encodes the spatial deictic information. But we can also see ma appearing in contexts that are not strictly spatial deixis related. So we have a sentence like, a banana was eaten and that banana was mine. Where we're not referring to banana in space, but we're referring to it in the discourse. We use ma here. A part-whole bridging example here. So where the existence of tires is implied by the mentioning of a car. The speaker used a possessive marker, a tired zoo, but they did say that not tired zoo is also acceptable. And then 35 through 37, we see some examples of personal pronouns which contain this ma suffix element. So we have ama, pa, ama, and ama again. And notably, ma prohibits covariant readings, which again is part of indexed or anaphoric definites. So when we have a sentence like, at every church, the pastor is a good speaker, if ma is present, then the pastor is interpreted as the same pastor going to different churches, being a good speaker. Without ma, the pastor can be interpreted as different pastors at different churches. All right, so moving along to this proposed structure here. So again, unique or plain definites, relatively simple. So we have looking at the diagram here from the sentence, the baby is sleeping. We just have the determiner head, which encodes uniqueness, and it takes the nominal phrase as its argument, yielding the unique baby, or the unique X such that X is a baby. Again, moving on to a more interesting category, the anaphoric definites. I'm claiming that ma is a realization of the syntactic index hosting head index or dx because ma surfaces when there's anaphoric reference. It's prohibited with globally unique definite expressions, and ma prevents covariant reading. So this is evidence that ma is at least somehow involved in anaphoric definites. To address the post-nominal discourse deictics, I propose a deictic phrase layer, which I'll show down here. Basically, this states that above the demonstrative phrase or the index phrase, there's a deictic phrase headed by the discourse deictic, and this phrase moves into the spec position of the deictic phrase, and this is in order to get the canonical linear order of prenominal ma, noun, and discourse deictic. So I'll finish off by looking at two analyses, two different structures based on the two that were alluded to in 17 and 18 above. So the index phrase analysis based on Haig 2021, Ma heads its own projection, I call it demonstrative phrase, and takes the NP as its argument. So it's between D and the NP. And so we can see here that the demonstrative phrase index here takes the noun phrase as its argument, yielding the demonstrative phrase, which is itself the argument of the deictic phrase. And we ultimately end up with the unique X such that X is a book. X is co-referential with a previous discourse referent, and it is proximal to speaker. It's also, like I mentioned earlier, suffixal element of personal pronouns. We see in table 1, each of these personal pronouns contains this ma suffix. And I'm arguing that this simply is the index. So we have the index, again, which I call dem here, taking the elided DP as its argument. The elided DP having third person and singular phi features leads the ma to surface as up. So in all of these cases, the facial surface, including the
James, please wrap up.
Sorry?
Please wrap up.
Okay, sure. Encode the phi features of the suffix of ma. I'll briefly look at the index DP analysis here, where the index phrase occurs in spec position, taking above the index D, and again, it moves to position so that we get the canonical word order of ma, the noun, and then discourse. So to conclude and wrap up, there's growing evidence that definiteness actually should be looked at as several subcategories of definiteness, and Hakha Lai is a language that provides additional evidence that this is the case, because we see delineation between these two categories. And in the case of Hakha Lai, ma is the syntactic instantiation of this index, which is a definitional component of anaphoric expression. And I'll finish there and say galomdo. Thank you very much.